Everyone, and welcome to the September 26th special meeting of the Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members Agajanian.
Present.
Devine.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Sinanian. Here. Mayor Garpetian.
Here. May we have your report, please?
Agenda for the September 26, 2017 special public meeting of the City Council is posted on Friday, September 22nd, 2017 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. The item before you will be Director of Public Works regarding overview of commercial solid waste collection services and discussion of franchise alternatives. 1A is motion directing staff to issue requests for proposals, RFP for commercial solid waste collection services under a franchise zone system.
Okay, Mr. Ochoa.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, we're going to provide you a summarized presentation that hopefully will profile an interesting and unique situation that Glendale has found itself in, but that needs to be updated and modernized, and do so forthwith. As you'll see in just a moment, we have in what is today a very heavily regulated in California component of the local economy by way of the waste hauling industry, of which we are a part through our Integrated Waste Management Division of the Public Works Department. But as you will see in just a bit, you will come to understand that this system that was established literally generations ago, largely has remained unchanged. And so what we will be asking of you vis-a-vis the process we would like you to give us direction to embark upon is that modernization, to move from where we have been and that which we have always known to a system that is much more contemporary with other communities across Los Angeles County and, in fact, up and down the state of California. So with no further ado, we'll have Mr. Golanian, our Public Works Director, walk you through the presentation and then surely be able to answer any questions that the council may have.
Thank you. Mr. Golanian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, members of City Council. As part of today's presentation, we are going to cover the following topics: a little bit of background and history, reasons why we're considering a solid waste commercial franchise, the results of the review and analysis by a third party, which is an experienced consultant, SCS engineers that we have hired primarily to focus their work on this franchise option. We have come up with, we'll share with you some franchise options and the evaluation criteria of all these options to select a vendor or vendors for the proposed franchise system. We'll go over some of the outreach that we have already conducted and the plans for more outreach in the future. And then finally, next steps, the related timeline, and as Mr. Ochoa mentioned, staff's recommendation and council's direction. Just to go over the vernacular and some of the definitions of what we're going to talk about, I want to stress the point here that we are recommending to issue an RFP for franchising the commercial bin collection services. These includes all businesses and multifamily properties with 5 units or more, and a small number of 4 units and less properties that use metal bins for their trash service. They range in size, as you can see in this picture, from 3 cubic yards to 8 cubic yards, with 3 cubic yards being the most common size, and the collection service is once a week is the most common frequency.
And we'll apologize in advance because it does get confusing. When we talk about commercial bin collection service, in our system, under our program, that includes, as Rubik says, both the business, what you would traditionally deem to be commercial, retail, commercial office, industrial, as well as multifamily, large multifamily residential properties. As you will see in the body of this presentation, we try to make a demarcation between those two market sectors, the business customers, the multifamily customers. And when you see what the split and the share of the market that the city participates in, you'll understand why we are endeavoring to look at those separately. The council may ultimately decide to take an action in the business sector, but not multifamily. or combine them together, but all of that will be a function of the RFP process pursuant to CEQA and our meet and confer rules.
And just to give you an idea of what the equipment, we have about 39 of these vehicles that are used in our multifamily commercial business collection service. The front loader is the picture on the bottom left, and the light-duty trucks that pull out the bins from tough spots that the front loaders cannot navigate. Just as a way of background, California started structuring and regulating the solid waste industry with these three major legislation. SB 5 in 1972 helped to create the Solid Waste Management Board and required counties to prepare comprehensive plans for disposal and recycling of solid waste. Later in 1977, SB 650 enacted a comprehensive litter control, recycling, and resource conservation plan and established a fund to pursue these activities. The more famous one, AB 939, in 1989, which most importantly established key waste diversion mandates for cities and counties, including a 50% diversion of solid waste by January of 2000 through source reduction, recycling, and composting activities. To date, so far, every year, City of Glendale has been able to meet this diversion rate of 50%. There's a hefty fine of $10,000 a day for municipalities who cannot meet this diversion requirement. However, the trend that we have seen with improved economy appears like people are recycling less and throwing away more. So we have to be cognizant of that fact and be diligent in providing education and activities that will promote the diversion rate and the recycling efforts.
Particularly as we start to move towards this zero waste policy for all of our integrated waste management activities, both public and private.
In the City of Glendale, we established the current basic service and revenue structure in the 40s, like Mr. Ochoa mentioned. And this implemented a regular collection of solid waste service at properties using public receptacles. I don't know what they were doing before then, but apparently they weren't using public receptacles. In the early 90s, we established a commercial permit system for bin services. Again, those metal bin services, not automated containers. And to this day, that system is still in place. So our existing system, I apologize, I keep referring to commercial bin service because I want to make sure that we have that clarification and no confusion. It's an open, non-exclusive permit system with 37 permitted haulers, permitted private solid waste haulers today, as of July, as well as the city's Public Works Department Integrated Waste Management Division that provides collection services to commercial businesses as well as multifamily properties.
And as council is aware at this point, for most municipalities, particularly in Los Angeles County, having that many permitted commercial private waste haulers operating in town, particularly for a city our size, is very, very rare.
And I'd like to note that as recently as a few years ago, we had as many as 70 haulers operating in the city. All of these accounts combined, including multifamily properties and businesses with commercial bin service, add up to 4,370 total customers. The current application process is fairly simple. Applicants provide information regarding their collection vehicles that they intend to use. They pay a fee of approximately $1,300. They agree to provide the city with tonnage reports that are required by AB 939 and also pay a fee for administering this waste diversion program requirements. But all the information that we collect and report to the state is essentially self-reported by the private haulers. Based on our records, when we closed the books in 2016, we had 47 permitted commercial haulers. and nearly 80% of the business accounts were served by 5 haulers in the city. But as you can see on this list, recently Athens Disposal acquired Recology Los Angeles. So the number has come down to 4 major haulers in the city, namely Athens, Consolidated, Southland, and Waste Management. The next hauler down the list, the tonnage that they've reported dropped significantly, and it's like 3% compared to 28%. 7 of these haulers, there's 7 haulers that provide construction and demolition, what we call C&D services. 13 haulers provide both fixed route, that's a collection service, as well as C&D service. And in 2016, 22 haulers reported little or no collection activity. This table shows the breakdown of the multifamily and business accounts in the city as of July of 2017. As you can see, the city provides commercial bin service to almost 88% of the roughly 2,800 accounts or customers. Private haulers provide services to about 81% of 1,520 business accounts, a great majority. So, in summary, SCS engineers recently compiled this data that shows an annual revenue for commercial bin service accounts of approximately $10 million. This is reported annual revenue. This includes both private haulers as well as the city's integrated waste management accounts. City crews service 65% of the customers, but generate only 42% of the revenue. Again, majority are multifamily properties, whereas private haulers generate 58% of the revenue, servicing 35% of the customers. So why consider a franchise system? Based on a 2015 study, nearly 3/4, like Mr. Ochoa mentioned, of 88 cities in LA County use franchise system. It's either one hauler exclusive citywide or one hauler exclusive per a number of zones. In fact, approximately 73% of the cities use an exclusive commercial franchise, and almost 82% use an exclusive residential franchise. We talked about legislation that started regulating solid waste collection in California, but there are also a few and new mandates aimed to enhance recycling, most notably organics and recycling at commercial properties. AB 32, you see here, it was intended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state to 90 levels by 2020, and this bill will mandate commercial recycling to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. AB 341 established a recycling goal of 75%, this is a diversion rate, by 2020, and new commercial recycling for businesses for at least 4 cubic yards of trash weekly, or multifamily properties with 5 units or more. AB 1826 is to establish organic waste recycling programs through the year 2020. Depending on the program's success, the requirement could be expanded to even include all businesses that generate as little as 2 cubic yards or more of solid waste per week. AB 1594, it's to eliminate diversion credit, and we've heard about this, for the use of green waste materials as alternative daily cover at landfills. The latest one, SB 1383, the Senate bill, it's a pending requirement by January 2022 to establish a 50% reduction in organic waste by 2020 and 75% reduction by 2025. Needless to say, all of these mandates and regulations that we need to comply with necessitates a commercial franchise system that would allow us, the city, to mandate, track, and report these recycling programs and diversion levels more efficiently and more accurately. Some of the other problems we've had with the existing system, as you can imagine, are multiple trucks on the same street on the same day, for example, wear and tear on street pavements, increased traffic, sometimes rogue haulers that are operating within the city without a permit, complaints that we receive from residents about a private commercial hauler that we cannot track, for example, if they start collecting trash before 7 o'clock. What are the types of commercial franchise systems available? Exclusive franchise, entire city. This would be one private hauler. Advantages are route density, obviously, reduced traffic compared to other systems, possible rate benefits because of economy scale. There's a possibility to put cap price increases on the rates. The hauler can amortize their equipment because of the size of the accounts, and an easier, like mentioned, a more efficient and accurate regulatory compliance. The obvious disadvantages are no customer choice, and hand in hand with that goes there's no service incentive to get accounts. There's a long list of cities, like Mr. Ochoa mentioned, within the county and up and down the state. Some large cities such as San Jose, Anaheim, Oakland, and then there's Santa Clarita, Lancaster, Palmdale. They all have a single private hauler exclusive zone for the entire city. The second option is exclusive franchise, but with multiple zones. Advantages are the same as exclusive franchise. The one difference is more administrative oversight depending on the number of the zones as opposed to just one hauler. Disadvantages, same as exclusive franchise, and I already mentioned administrative work. The city of Los Angeles, I'm pretty sure you've heard, recently rolled out their exclusive franchise 7-zone system. They've had some hiccups in the process, but Fresno and Stockton do have those multiple exclusive franchise zones. The open, non-exclusive permit system that we and the city of Burbank currently have, advantages are customer choice and incentives, but and the city has really no involvement in rate setting. Disadvantages I've talked about: increased traffic, increased emissions, street wear and tear, and higher risk of non-compliance. The city's the fourth and last option is non-exclusive franchise. There are no zones involved. This is citywide. There's a higher risk of non-compliance, again, depending on the number of franchisees. But all the other disadvantages apply. Not as many as traffic and emissions and wear and tear issues and an open permit system, nonetheless more than exclusive, the other two exclusive systems. Pasadena, Pomona, and Newport Beach are examples of those cities with non-inclusive franchise systems. Again, the purpose of today's report is to request your approval to release an RFP. The service options that we have available and we will include in that RFP process, obviously, is the regular collection services. There are also services, like I mentioned, on those legislations to comply with state laws, organics, diversion. We have some extra services that will be included as separate line items, as at alternates, wheel out service, price for locking bins. There's also this ancillary services that the city currently provides for free, bulky abandoned items that you are familiar with. Recycling services at commercial establishments will have to be included, as well as recycling education and the street sweeping that the city provides currently. We have collectively come up with evaluation criteria to select the private hauler or haulers. and a number of them. I've just listed a few. It depends on whether the firm has any outstanding claims or litigations against them and the nature of it, the level of the experience of the company or the hauler, the financial stability of the firm, obviously the proposed rates, the amount of the franchise fees, their ability to meet environmental mandates, more specifically diversion and other sustainability efforts, and some other additional programs, enhanced programs that they can provide. So, to go over what commercial service options you have for you to consider, obviously status quo, we won't do anything. We don't believe that's the right option to stay as it is because of all the numerous issues we've had. Non-exclusive franchise system or open competition among franchisees. Multiple franchise zones, one hauler in each zone, depending on the number of the zones. Or exclusive franchise citywide, that means one hauler only. Additional considerations for you is do we want the city to continue to provide multifamily bin service collection? Do we want the city to stop providing that kind of service for multifamily properties? Obviously, if that's the direction we're moving forward with, it will be subject to meet and confer with the association. Finally, we can always have the city be available to provide services in each of these franchise zones that would act like a market check for the haulers and their rates. Based on the geographical density of the accounts, the existing accounts, SCS engineers, analysis, and input we have received from haulers, we believe a commercial franchise system exclusive with 3 zones would work best for the city. Although it'll be based on some geographical constraints, the goal would be to equalize the revenue amongst the haulers to keep the proposed rates uniform for the same level of service within the given zone. These lines are drawn arbitrarily, they're approximate. We will have to adjust and create a more accurate division to reflect the equalized market share. So how would the RFP work? Our intention is to have 2 separate bid packages. First bid package will contain the basic proposal for rates for business sector only. As you recall, we noted that the majority, about 81% of the businesses are serviced by the private sector anyway. So for the remaining businesses, remaining and the combined business sector will ask for proposed rates. And then we'll rank however many have submitted proposals and rank the top tier. Then bid package number 2 will contain proposal for rates for cities' multifamily accounts. And this is the majority, about 88% of the multifamily 5 units and above that currently the city's integrated waste management services. Additional consideration will obviously be given for the valuation of the city's multifamily market share. Or if that's not the direction we're proceeding with, then there is a potential for integrated waste management or the city to expand their multifamily residential service to the balance of the market that are serviced by private haulers.
So that idea being that if we were to actually expand into multifamily, that handful of accounts that we don't currently control in the city that is multifamily, large multifamily residential business, we would move to absorb those accounts and at the same time move out of the holdings that we have in the true business corridor, your commercial, office, and retail and industrial. So you would see that slide forward on the multifamily, slide back on the business.
As for outreach efforts, we have held 2 public forums on August 23rd and August 24th. We have met with groups such as Building Owners and Managers Association. We are working on scheduling meetings with Chamber of Commerce, business associations, business groups. We've met with the existing private haulers, and a couple of times with integrated waste management staff, and as recently as last week. And as part of those conversations, we have reassured them that the intent of today's report is to request council's consideration and direction on the release of the RFP. Moving forward, we will have additional enhanced outreach with the stakeholders on all levels. We'll walk them through the process. We intend to do advertising, promotions in newspapers, on cities' websites. We have issued a public survey and collecting inputs from the public general. What are the next steps? It is our intention to release the RFP, if directed by council, in mid-October. It will include a sample of the franchise agreement. In the process of waiting for responses, we will hold pre-proposal meetings. I'm pretty sure there will be a lot of questions and obviously responses, and there may be a need to issue addendum. In January 2018, we're hoping to be able to evaluate the proposals and start negotiations with the top-tier selected, top-tier private haulers. In parallel, we recently embarked on initiating a cost of service analysis of the refuse rates for the services that the city provides. That should wrap up by January, hoping to be able to present that to council and city manager's office in February.
And the COSA should allow for a good price comparison with the pricing that we see from the private market vis-a-vis the RFP process.
In March and April, if necessary, depending on the direction we go, we'll meet and confer with associations. In May of 2018, we come back to council for consideration of the proposals and certification of the CEQA. And in June, we'll finalize the selection of haulers, execute the agreements, and start the transition period, switching off the accounts, and additional outreach to the customers between July and September. And it is our hope that we can roll out the new collection service with the new haulers and new accounts sometime in October of 2018. Just to recap again, the council direction that we are requesting today is to provide direction to staff on the franchise system option. Just to reiterate, it's either exclusive zones versus citywide franchise, or citywide non-exclusive franchise. So the first two being exclusive, the last one, the third one being non-exclusive, but it'll be citywide. We also need to decide on the number of franchisees we are going to select. Direction, obviously, to release the RFP as we've outlined. Again, as staff recommends, the best option to be exclusive with 3 equalized zones in the city, and any other additional or different direction that you'd like to provide. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions, comments from staff? If not, I can go to the public first and then come back.
I have a question.
Okay, Mr. Agajan.
Just one more time, can you repeat how divided in 3 zones based on what based on number of accounts, money-wise?
We have looked at several ways. There is no direct correlation, and we've studied that. Our consultant has studied this. No direct correlation with population or geographical size. We've considered number of accounts, but we believe the best way to equally distribute the market share will be based on revenue. So there may be a zone that's smaller in size, but larger in revenue. So for argument's sake, with 3 zones at $10 million a market share, that's approximately $3.3 million a zone, give or take.
All right, thank you.
Question, Mr. Mayor. So whether it's 3 zones, 4 zones, or 5 zones, the city staff has the ability to divide the city into equal market shares.
Yes, Councilman Sanam.
Thank you.
Any more questions from staff? Okay, I'm going to go to the public first. First speaker is Bruce Jarvis.
Good afternoon. Mayor, would you like 3 minutes or 5 minutes?
3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members. My name is Bruce Sherwood. I work for City Employees. I'm a labor rep there, and our organization represents the Glendale City Employee Associations. I'd like, first of all, to say that anytime we mention the word outsourcing or contracting, it raises a little bit of apprehension. I want you to really take that into consideration. Also, through the years, we're just generally opposed to contracting out. We found that, in the long run, if you have to start laying people off, it's a burden to the system. Some of those people then depend upon government services. We've also found that sometimes the contracted people don't spend the money in our community because sometimes they're lower wages. We also find that contracted services, they're driven more by money as opposed to quality of services. And quality of services, there's a lot of corporate knowledge that's inherent in an organization that sometimes gets lost when you contract that out. So we'd like to really take that into consideration. And a lot of apprehension, I said, when you mentioned layoffs, people are concerned. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Ron Saldana. My speaker is not on, sorry. Ron Saldana.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Ron Saldana. I'm the Executive Director of the California Waste and Recycling Association. We represent waste haulers throughout California, primarily in Southern California. First of all, I'd just like to say that from our perspective, we support a citywide, non-exclusive franchise agreement. And let me explain that a little bit. I just got a couple points I want to make in that regard. First of all, everybody talks about Los Angeles. We see what's happening in Los Angeles. I've sat in Los Angeles hearings and heard over and over and over as the staff promised the City Council that rates would go down under an exclusive franchise system. We now know that that's not the case. In most cases, I can't say all, but in most cases, we've seen rates double and triple. So that's one of the major issues. Do you want to keep competition alive in the city of Glendale? I think that certainly is beneficial to the businesses, and I think in the end it's beneficial to you and the whole city. One thing is we know competition, low rates, low competitive rates, and excellent service. And if you don't like your service, fine. You hire somebody else. So it's pretty simple in that regard. Rate structure, if you go to an exclusive franchise system, I don't care whether it's 1 zone or 10 zones, you're going to have to set rates. And that becomes a pretty sticky wicket if you know what I'm talking about in that regard. something that you don't have to do and probably you wouldn't want to do. And I just wanted to mention numbers for a minute. You've seen how the numbers decline. One thing about the waste industry is we've seen consolidation is very, very active, and it's been that way for years. You've heard some numbers. Glendale used to be 77 haulers, then it went down to 40-something haulers. Now it's down to 30-something haulers. A couple of things in that regard. I think, again, you've only got a few haulers that have the majority of the work in the city, and you've got 22 haulers that don't really do anything in the city or very little. So I would think that you could eliminate them right off the bat. And another group to look at would be the C&D folks. C&D collection, if you're talking about trucks on the street, et cetera, roll-off, that's going to be the same. And you've got C&D haulers here that work this city. They know the customers. They're here to respond, and they're going to be. You're not going to save anything that I know of by including that in an exclusive franchise. If you were to go to an exclusive franchise, we would hope that you would add a couple of more zones and have 4 or 5 zones. That would be our hope. Thank you.
So, excuse me, sir,
Yes.
CND?
Construction and demolition debris.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker is Gregory Tan, followed by Ara Dorian.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, City Manager, City staff. My name is Gregory Tan. Office is on 535 West Colorado Street in Glendale. I'm actually here today as a apartment building owner with a couple buildings in Los Angeles, and just wanted to make sure that some of the issues that have occurred, while I'm sure you've heard of them, wanted to make sure that you were formally told to you, the City Council. So. A couple of things that came up separate from that. I did see that there was a survey that was passed out in regards to the city franchising. Asked a lot of questions about the people in the city, the businesses, and the waste production levels. Noted that there was a question in regards to would people be in favor of having less pollution, traffic, so on and so forth, which, while I think is a good question, is a bit of a leading question and doesn't address some of the concerns with Los Angeles, such as pricing and so on. I know that in Los Angeles there was confusion, not just in my building, again, talking to other building owners, where there were confusion between the different haulers about who was taking over a certain area, when they're taking over a certain area. Hopefully, again, we can foresee these issues and kind of address that. Other issue was regard to, the pricing. Again, was mentioned. I can tell you from my buildings, my price increased by 25% already, and by January will be doubled what I have for the same level of service. So I can tell you for sure that does occur. And the last item, just wanted to note, as mentioned previously, the idea of having franchises, while there are many advantages, you are creating little monopolies. And from a business perspective, it seems like competition seems like a good idea for the benefit of the city and so on. So I believe we are early enough in the process of the development of this plan. I think we can kind of look to Los Angeles and see a lot of things not to do, and hopefully we can avoid those issues. So thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Ara Dorian. I'm sorry, Ara Dorian. Just have this tendency of turning off my mic. Followed by Martin Marufa.
I have a question. One, I want to say congratulations. You guys are doing such a great job.
Thank you.
No smile? No laughter?
Big smile.
Well, amazed.
Just a point of disclosure that Ara is my good neighbor, so.
And I've also served in the U.S. Armed Forces, so I have several questions, but it has several parts to it. My one is, since 2013, the city council that you guys are have not hired an integrated waste management administrator. I wanted to know why.
Okay. Just go ahead
Why
and
can't
ask
you
all
see-
your questions, then we'll
Okay.
get to the answers later.
Number two is why don't we start mandating our diversion program here in the city? Burbank has it. Several other cities have it. They are doing it as well up and down the state of California, just like the gentleman was talking about. Why don't we expand and our refuse departments to meet all the job needs as before, as the city was planning on expanding its field up to Tahunga, which I remembered. I don't know if that still is going or it's not going. I don't know. And why are we looking to outsource for other franchise companies? And if the city has already made a decision without the people from the city of Glendale, Montrose, and La Crescenta, because I have not seen the flyers that have gone out to the cities.
Thank you, Ara. We'll try to get to your questions later on in our discussions.
I was curious, why don't you do it now?
Usually we don't have a two-way conversation, but we'll get to the answers to your questions. Thank you for being here. Next speaker is Martin Marufo.
Good evening, council members. My name is Martin Marufo, and I'm an assistant business manager with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 18. I'm speaking on behalf of the employees of Integrated Waste that petitioned for representation by the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Your illustrious city manager deemed it inappropriate for Local 18 to represent these excellent workers, and Local 18 has pending unfair labor charges against the city for this refusal to recognize Local 18 as the bargaining authority. Contracting out of this bargaining unit work would result in another unfair labor charge against the city of Glendale. Local 18 has already won a decision at the Public Employees Relations Board for Glendale Water and Power, which is similar to this contracting out. Of course, the city of Glendale is disputing the decision. Contracting out of bargaining unit work without meeting and conferring is a violation of Myers-Milius-Brown Act, and I trust that the city of Glendale's City Employees Association will be filing an unfair labor practice if that does not happen, because any good representative would do that, and they probably would stand their ground and hold out and file an unfair if it did happen. The residents of the city of Glendale can be better served if the city were to invest in their own infrastructure by purchasing new trucks, maintaining their existing vehicles, and addressing the serious issues that were brought to light by these excellent employees during our petition hearing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. Okay, Mr. Ochoa, do you have any comments to some of the questions that were raised? Or
Yes, sir. No, maybe in reverse order. I certainly appreciate Mr. Marufo. We get along rather well. His comments. I will submit to you that when the power plant employees wanted to break away from IBEW, the same illustrious city manager thought that was inappropriate and mandated that they stay with IBEW, and miraculously there was no PERB charge associated with that action. So while I certainly appreciate Martin's comments, as I always do, I don't know that that's necessarily doesn't have too much weight in this particular venue, particularly because, as you've heard Mr. Galanian say it, myself say it, Mr. Doyle is here in the audience, city attorney is here. Whatever we do by way of the RFP process, we recognize that if there is a triggering decision or a movement by the city council, we will have to meet and confer pursuant to MMB. We know it. We respect it. We have talked with the folks in the association through their association, and again, Mr. Galanian has made that abundantly clear, I believe, to his employees. Yet, because we have what is today, appreciating Mr. Tan's comment, what amounts to a monopoly over all single-family business and 89% of all of the multifamily business, I think we have an obligation to our shareholders by way of the residents and businesses of Glendale to take the Pepsi challenge with all the private haulers to make sure that we are providing that cost-effective level of service. And at the end of the day, you are what the scoreboard says you are, and neither us nor our very fine and proud employees should be necessarily afraid of comparing the service levels and the cost to provide that service. With respect to LA City, and people have talked a lot about LA City, both today and previously. I know Council has evinced an interest in what happened there and what went right and what went wrong, and with complete respect to our neighbors across the river. When you look at the process that was executed and the programs and the features, the specific features of those programs that were requested by the city and that the haulers gladly provided and were charging for, you could make an argument, I think a good argument, that the procurement process was somewhat gold-plated. I don't necessarily know that we need to have GPS tracking devices on all of our trucks. I don't necessarily know that we need to have the types of camera equipment that was required to be on those trucks. There's a number of small small fees and charges that ultimately accumulate into what the fee and revenue structure was for that system across the river, and we will try to learn from that. I do suggest to you that if we were to go with the non-exclusive citywide franchises, while certainly that is something that the council can do and will yield some degree of efficiencies by way of the descriptions that Mr. Golanian has referenced, you also have to be very keenly aware, as I know you are, whether or not that effectively precludes any discussion about what happens with large multifamily bin service. Because you know our streets, particularly in the south and on the west side of town, that if we were to have considerably more trash truck traffic servicing those accounts, those apartment buildings, that could be chaos. And right now, again, 89% of that work comes through City of Glendale. So as much as anything else, the quality of life of our residents, the ratepayers who pay for the service, I think is going to be a heavy determining factor. And that is not lost on certainly the council and not on the staff. With respect to some of the staffing questions that were raised, I believe his name is Mr. Norian, we did have an administrator. We also had an assistant administrator in integrated waste, and we had supervisors, several supervisors in integrated waste. When the administrator position was vacated, we expected that the assistant administrator could fill into some of that role and lend some leadership there. And to the extent that we were able to downsize the number of management bodies, it made sense to us to do that. And along with the capable supervision and the lead workers that we have, I think we were able to continue with a high level of service to our residents. With respect to outsourcing, if we were to move in a direction that would outsource, as I said already, certainly we would meet and confer pursuant to the Miles Milius-Brown Act. And when it comes to outreach, rest assured that is the other lesson I think that we are learning by way of the Los Angeles example, is that you cannot communicate enough. You saw in the suggested timeline that there would be a minimum of 3 months worth of intensive communication once the selections are made. As Mr. Golanian will tell you, and certainly Mr. Lorenz, our Director of Communications, would tell you, that could easily double and not start the actual program not on October 1, but perhaps even January 1. It's a function of getting it right, not necessarily getting it fast. And so the first things first is making sure that the procurement process is understandable, streamlined, and accomplishes your policy goals. Chief among them is going to be value to the ratepayer, as well as fairness to all of our private haulers, as well as potentially if we walk down that road of the multifamily service, and that is a big if considering the quality of life dynamics that I've already outlined. If we go down that road, also making sure that we are compliant with state law as it pertains to our employees' rights.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa. So who would like to go first?
I just have just a few questions. My first question when I heard about this was, how would it affect our staff, our employees? Would there be layoffs? That was my first question. And what was the answer that I got, Mr. Ochoa?
The
Do you recall?
the very
I don't put you on
common
the spot.
answer that I give you all, it depends. If the city were to only franchise the business sector and not the multifamily sector, my belief is that just through attrition of our normal retirement rates, there wouldn't be any layoffs. Between folks who are off on workers' comp, folks who are on vacation, folks who are sick, whatever the case might be, we would have enough drivers to provide those services. Obviously, if the decision is made at a future date, the appropriate time to put the multifamily bin service into play under this franchising system, be it exclusive zones or non-exclusive zones, at that point you probably would be looking at some degree of downsizing. But again, depending on what the attrition rates would be from our normal retirement rates, might not be very significant at all. At all. It could be negligible, in fact. But that's a bridge that we would cross at a later date. Now, we do have a number of employees, I believe 60 drivers. 60 drivers. And because of the nature of the work, we are constantly looking for folks to provide service to our customers. Sometimes the days are long and we have a great deal of overtime. I think that can equalize by the abundance of drivers that we have, depending on what direction the council wanted to go in. So it kind of depends, but it doesn't, any action you take today, one, doesn't result in anything, because all you would be directing today is the distribution of the RFPs. Depending on which alternative you land on, could be no impact on any of our employees. And if you were to take the action at a later date that would impact multifamily bin service, that could have an impact on our employees, but not necessarily have an impact on our employees.
And I think you mentioned to me that if it came to that there would be an effort to reassign.
Oh, most definitely,
so
ma'am.
that we wouldn't have to lay off any of our staff.
I think
that's
yes.
an important.
Yes, ma'am. That's a great point. I thank you for raising that, because when you look at what we have done in GWP even, as well as some of our other operations in the wake of the Great Recession, when we did downsize, first and foremost, the idea was to find locations in other parts of the organization for quality people. And so that idea of not leaving any stone unturned and trying to find places in the organization for people that are already here is not lost on us. And I think there's a tremendous amount of demonstrable good faith that we work very diligently to do just that.
Okay. My second question is, you mentioned that staff has already begun the public input and outreach. Have you reached out to the Montrose Shopping Association, and what are the results of those? Because we don't have any. We don't know how many people that you talk to, how many businesses you talk to, what did they want, what did they prefer?
We have resisted going en masse to a lot of those types of sessions to talk about this endeavor, because we don't quite know what the council's policy would be. And so if we were to go to Montrose, for example, and say we were going to go one exclusive hauler for everybody, that would cause a reaction. If we were to come back and say, well, maybe it'll be non-exclusive, that has a different reaction. So until and unless council gave us the direction as to what your preference would be, what your policy would be, we have had limited discussions with folks, but not anything on a organization-wide scale. I will tell you that the conversations that we have had are focused on pricing, and then secondarily with business customers, focused on the ability to choose and competition, but quite distinctly in that order.
Okay, and my final question is, if we do commercial only, then that will involve some small businesses. Will that kind of be a detriment to them because of negotiating of rates? And how would that work out?
That is a good question as well, because if we were to go with, let's just say, the business sector only, part of the question would be, are we mandating, unlike what we have today, that every customer, everybody who has a business address has to have a service level. Because today there are any number of arrangements that folks may have. You and I have side-by-side shops. I have a restaurant. You have a boutique. You have very little trash. I have a lot of trash. You come over and buy me lunch, once a month. I pay the trash bill. And those types of very informal arrangements exist today in small businesses up and down the city. If we were to go towards an environment where there is a minimum service charge for a minimum level of service, in this example, the business owner with a very small amount of waste that is generated, still might have a rate that you have to pay, and that probably is going to be aggravating to you. But in trying to equalize the playing field for all of our businesses as well as our commercial waste haulers here in the city, we also have to take stock of what the requirements are by way of Prop 218 and Prop 26. And so if this is a city-regulated environment, then what we are endeavoring to do over the next year is modernize, as I said, some of the inequities that exist within our commercial waste system, or our integrated waste system. And that might be one of the eggs ultimately that gets broken by this omelet.
And will we have any, if we do any of these franchises, will we have any say in the rates? I mean, can we ask them to use the same rates that the city is using so that there is no hike in like 25 or 50% in the...
Indirectly, yes. I think through this RFP process, what you would be looking towards is to have haulers submit to you the maximum rates that they could charge. So you have rate ceilings, if you will. And that is the most anyone could ever charge, subject to any increase in rates that you would allow pursuant to your franchise agreement. That doesn't preclude a business from negotiating lower rates necessarily. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. It would depend on what they thought the value was. As you saw in Mr. Galanian's presentation, part of the overall discussion will be the modernization of our residential rate structure as well. And in doing so, we'll be doing a cost of service analysis for all of our accounts, for all of our services that we provide. In doing so, you will have then, because we don't have it today, again, this is an antiquated system that we have, you will have the clearest, most up-to-date idea about what the cost of waste service, be it a 3-yard bin one time a week or 3-yard bins 3 times a week. You'll know what that cost is, and you'll be able to utilize that in making determinations as to which proposals that you would seek to franchise. So indirectly, you would have that.
Okay. Mr. Najarian, would you like to go
I have
next?
some questions. So are we going to presume that whichever way we go that we're going to continue using shoal, or is a criteria that we would be interested in a diversion, and we have got this whole big shoal issue out there, is a criteria factor worthy of mentioning, where the waste will ultimately be deposited?
It could be a factor, but to the extent that you still want to allow the dynamics of the private market to do what they do in generating as maximum amount of efficiency as possible, I would submit to you that a number of the haulers that are operating in town have agreements of their own, private bilateral agreements with either transfer stations or their own transfer stations or other landfills, that they have obligations to make tonnage deposits at those other facilities. If we were to, and they've negotiated those perhaps over a long, broad horizon, and in doing so they have achieved an efficiency on what the price per ton might be. If we were to disrupt that and say any trash collected in Glendale has to be deposited at Shoal Canyon, you are potentially, arguably, interrupting that private arrangement, and in doing so, perhaps costing your end user, the ratepayer, a higher monthly rate, because they're going to pay the gate rate at Shoal Canyon versus something that might be kind of a buy big, go long situation that hauler would have negotiated on their own.
So I'm looking at it from the other way. I mean, we want to preserve and extend the life of Shoal as long as possible, and those that divert it to another location, whether it's through recycling or through any other means, would, I mean, if there's two companies, everything else being equal, one company that doesn't deposit in Shoal, I think would have a leg up on one that's going to be filling the landfill.
Yes, I understand your point, and I think it's a good point. If I don't know though that you necessarily would put a heavy weight on that, but I do agree to the idea, the concept that you're describing, whereby a hauler that takes the load of trash to a different location, that they are in essence preserving capacity at Shoal Canyon, because that trash is making its way to the desert or to the Antelope Valley or Chiquita Canyon or someplace else. So could you weigh that? I think you could, but it would be difficult, I think, because sometimes they may need to, by the volume of business they're doing in town, or maybe they've satiated the requirement at that other facility that they have, that they would take it to Shoal. And I don't know that you would be able to, on a real-time basis, that you could model out now at the front end, be able to hold them accountable for that. The last point I would make is that to the extent that even if a hauler is taking the trashed recyclables, the collected materials to another location, part of the concept that we have, as Rubik had identified, is to make them accountable for those diversion requirements. So if you're operating in town, here is what our expectation is, that you will divert, and at some point we allow them to go and divert it as best they can with the technology that they have access to.
Okay, the next question, and I just have about 3 or 4, and let me just get through them. With regard to the number of zones, again, is that something that we can decide at the date that we award, or are the size of the zones so critical as they develop their, I guess part of the criteria is the proposed rates. So is that something that we're flexible on, or we really need to decide if it's going to be exclusive, that there's going to be 3, and stick to that at this point?
Whether it's zone or the number of franchises citywide, we would ask you to identify at the front end if possible, because as you point out, the haulers are going to be predicating their rates on an expectation of rate density and of revenue potential. And so I think if we say we reserve the right to receive 3 to 5 or 3 to 6 or whatever the number is, my guess is that you will see that inefficiency reflected in the rate proposals that you get. Now, maybe as you've heard one of the speakers that was focused on competition, maybe because of competition that's less of an issue, maybe. But I do think that at least for our recommendation, as we've studied this, we would ask that you give us that direction on the number of zones and allow for that maximum efficiency. Now, if in next spring, council says, well, I know we told you 3, but we actually want 4 or 5, I would look to the city attorney to determine whether or not we have flexibility within the RFP process to either reject all the proposals and negotiate with proponents based on what council believes at that time, or if we would simply just go back to those top tier, based on their proposals, those top tier 3, 4, 5 haulers, and say, okay, circumstances have changed, let's negotiate what the rate ceilings would be. I would submit to you that would be probably rather difficult, but it's not impossible.
Okay. Next question. On this proposed evaluation criteria, there's no point system placed on that, and I think that's pretty critical. Do we have any ideas how you're going to weight each and every one of those criteria? Because, that's the critical factor here. Are we going to put experience higher than outstanding litigation, or the proposed rates versus their diversion? It's quite a mix of criteria you have there, and I think that's, if we're going to be actually scoring these in a technical manner, we need to get an idea as to how you're going to be weighting each and every one of those criteria.
Yes, Councilmember Najarian, our consultant has put together a table with the weights associated with each of these criteria. I don't know if, David, you have that available that you can speak about?
Is that page 24 on the SCS? I'm sorry?
16, page 16.
Yeah.
I think you might be confusing two evaluation criteria. One, we did have a weighting for each of the criteria in deciding the scenarios in the what type of system to do. And I think what Councilmember Najarian is talking about is the weighting of the criteria in the RFP, like how much is based on cost, how much is based on diversion experience, how much is on safety and litigation and things like that. So yes, that would be part of the RFP. So we don't have that today. That's something that would probably develop as part of developing the RFP process. And when the RFP is put together, what often happens is that RFP comes back to the City Council for the City Council to approve, and you'll see a lot of other things, including that evaluation criteria weighting.
Okay, thank you. That's fair enough. And let me just hold the questions then and let someone else get to it. Thank you.
Councilmember Sinanian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first, to follow up on the sort of the thought process that Councilmember Najarian suggested with respect to giving preference or not giving preference to a hauler that takes the trash somewhere other than Shoal, it's an interesting thought. But if you take that concept a little too far, then you're in essence encouraging everyone to not take it to Shoal in order to have that same preference point, in order to be on equal ground. And I don't know whether that's really conducive to your stated goal of keeping Shoal going as long as possible, because then sort of makes Shoal meaningless. I'm just throwing that out there, just as a thought. This idea of naming the number of franchises or zones, whatever it is that we end up concluding, and then at the end of the process going to the city attorney for advice on whether we can alter that number. I don't like that idea because there's too much uncertainty there. I don't know how we deal with that, but I'm just saying it just doesn't make sense to go through the whole process and then face the uncertainty of the city attorney telling us, no, this is, you said, let's say 2, and you're stuck with 2, or you said 8, you're stuck with 8. Did I understand that correctly?
I would certainly I want to answer for city attorney, but I will say from my point of view, we can do that. It wouldn't be easy, but it's not impossible, or I would argue not unlawful, depending on the language contained in the RFP.
I think the RFP can always be drafted in a way, Councilmember Sinanian, to provide that flexibility. So the bare minimum question is illegal, permissible, yes, and I think, but I don't want to underestimate or understate the points that Mr. Ochoa made about how well those proposals are then put together, given if you provide more flexibility in terms of the number of zones.
So if folks prepare a proposal for 2 zones and then we say, oh, you know what, we decided that 5 is the ultimate number, they're going to say, well, wait a second, I wasn't bidding for that.
And just to provide, if you wanted that flexibility, we would put it in there and say 3 zones, but the council reserves the right to extend that. Then the proposal will say, here's my proposal based on 3 zones, but if it changes, those numbers either go out the window or they change in this way.
I think that may be the way to deal with it in order to avoid having to do an RFP all over again. The city of Los Angeles, they went through a pretty long and arduous process of zoning, franchising zoning, and some of the folks that came here talked about the problems that the end product, the result of this process has posed for the city and the residents. Having the example of Los Angeles, I'm assuming we can avoid those pitfalls that they apparently weren't able to.
That is our goal and expectation, sir.
Okay, yes. And there's nothing there that is not surmountable, I assume. They're all technical issues that can be dealt around or resolved in our own process.
I believe so, as long as we are willing to, on one hand, not over specify and not gold plate the RFP process, and we are willing to spend the appropriate amount of time on outreach.
Okay. So, in the ultimately, I think, well, I should speak for myself. I would want some kind of a structure which controls the costs or the costs that the residents are going to bear as a result of this process, assuming we move forward with it. Is there going to be a cost suppression element or cost control element in all of this? And what is it going to look like? I know you addressed it a little bit,
Sure,
but if you
yes,
can
sir.
elaborate.
That's a good question. To the extent that what we contemplate is a series of price caps, and to the extent that, let's say this is a 7-year franchise or an 8-year franchise, the council could have the ability to allow for increases in those maximum prices. I think, again, the question would be one more legally to ensure that we don't run into any Prop 218 or Prop 26 issues. But that being said, the idea would be give us ceilings, and then the council can adjust those ceilings as you go. With respect to what one of the speakers had indicated, that perhaps the city council doesn't necessarily want to be in that sticky wicket of rate making. It's kind of a day late and a buck short, because you're in that process today, both in water, sewer, electrical, trash. You do that now as a board of directors.
Those two props have forced our hand, right? We
In
have
some
to
cases,
act
yes, sir.
upon it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And
Councilman Sinanian, I'm
yes.
sorry, in addition
Go
to
ahead.
that, further control mechanism could be by way of a consumer price index, and no more than that we can set into their prices.
Okay. In any case, I think I would expect all of us would be very interested in as stringent price controls as possible. My last question, Mr. Mayor. In the city of Los Angeles, after they went through this process, did this result in layoffs of their public employees, or no? It was different because all the zones were already private.
Councilman Sinanian, I don't believe so. The city of Los Angeles did not, at the time, collect commercial service, did not provide commercial service to businesses and multifamily as significant of a rate that we do. Okay. So if any, I have not heard of any layoffs. They were able to absorb whatever staffing they had in other operations. And they're actually added because of the burden of administration of all these commercial franchise and all the zones and all the customer complaints and stuff like that.
That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Golanian. Thank you, Mr. Ochoa.
Thank you, Councilmember Sinanian. Councilmember Al-Jania.
I guess all of us are very concerned with what will happen with our employees. So, as has been raised earlier, is there any way that these private haulers will absorb our employees or be part of discussion that they have somehow to help us out, if that's the only way we're going to do?
If we ever got there, if council decided that you wanted to contract out large multifamily, that would be one of the things that would be on the table vis-a-vis the meet and confer process, because we'd have to negotiate in good faith over the impacts. So if one of those impacts was the loss of a job, then we would look both to repurposing staff within the organization first, and then requiring, perhaps, not even just requesting, but requiring haulers to absorb those employees into their operations. But I would submit to you that we're not even there at this point.
Right. Okay, I'm very concerned with the monopoly that each zone, one hauler will serve all that area, because I am a business owner and I had so much hard time with trash haulers. And I'm having problem. I was thinking maybe we have to have 3 haulers and not more, and let them go through the city and collect the trashes. As you mentioned, some of these streets are so tiny, will be a hard time for them to go in and out of this that street, but also businesses. They are going to be stuck with one company, and they can't get any way out of it, and they have to. To take all the abuses these haulers they can apply to them. The third thing I have a question is, let's assume we ask for the prices, and one hauler gets the lowest price in zone 1 and zone 2. And then what happens? We say, this is, sure. So he is the best in or all 3 zones. One company is providing best prices, and they have all these opportunities, and we evaluate it, we say this company is the best.
Sure.
Then we go to the second best. That doesn't make sense.
Not necessarily, sir. You raise a good point. If we have, let's say we have 3 zones, and one hauler comes in with the best price in all 3 zones, part of the question would be, do you go to a single exclusive hauler for the entire business sector of the city? Legal would have to weigh in with respect to the way that the discussion has been bid out, as it were, for the RFP process. So you would have to consider alternatively, you would want the latitude in your RFP process to be able to go to the other top-tier proponents, all other things being equal, their experience, their viability, whatever the case might be, and have them bring their pricing down to meet the pricing in another zone. Because what we would not like to do, and it's reflective of the equalization of revenue, is that I operate on West Glen Oaks Boulevard is where my business is, but by the sheer accident of geography, my trash rate is higher than if I were on East Glen Oaks over by Jackson Street. That could be very problematic. And so I think that the council on the front end of this, being in the rate-making process, would be looking to equalize revenue as well as costs. Because, if you are in Montrose, the unit cost of water for the different tiers is going to be the same as if you were in the southern end of the city. And I think we want to replicate that in this scenario. So your point's very well taken. And that's something that we would have to keep a very close eye on.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aghjanian. First of all, I would like to thank all our employees who are here today. It's very important for us. For your presence is very important because that means you care. That means you care about what's going to happen in our city, as well as your careers. And we do the same. We care about what's going on with our employees, and I just wanted to reemphasize that. We are not here to discuss of the layoffs or any of that issues. That's not in our table right now. That's not what I'm going to do right now at this time. This has nothing to do with taking business away from our employees. So, few questions. Commercial accounts does not include the multifamily at this time. Am I correct? Or it does?
If you look at our system, commercial is bin service, and bin service includes multifamily. For purposes of our discussion today, we're trying to break those apart.
Okay.
So we have multifamily, and then you have commercial business service.
So we have 1,473 businesses, 96 city facilities, and 2,623 multifamily, five units and more. Just want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. A couple of questions for Mr. Gulanian. You mentioned Fresno and Stockton, and also the services that we provide, bulky item pickup and street sweeping, which is a free services. What would happen to the services if you go to franchise zone, either exclusive or non-exclusive?
Mr. Mayor, our experience with franchise systems in other cities have been, for the most part, in order for the haulers to get these businesses, they have offered to provide those services for free. Doesn't mean that a private hauler may not put a price tag on those services that we request in the RFP. So it's all up to what we receive and how much we can negotiate.
And if I'm not mistaken, it was indicated that the total revenue at this time is about $10 million.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the reported revenue is approximately 10 million.
And does that include the accounts that we have? Our revenues is included
Yes,
in that
sir.
$10 million? Okay. And let's be honest with each other, because of the franchise fees and everything else that you're going to require, the more insurance and everything, we're anticipating that the rates are going to be a little bit higher than what it is today.
Mr. Mayor, again, I would say for the most part, they will be multifamily properties or units or businesses that will essentially have to pay more because of the scenario that Mr. Ochoa noted. But through the outreach process, some of them may elect to go with less frequency pickup. There's a provision in our current ordinance that if they're generating less trash, they can use a smaller container, hence pay a smaller fee. So some will pay higher for sure, and some, I believe, will end up with paying less.
Okay. And there are 5 haulers at this time that they have 80% share of the total commercial, the business waste basically. 80% of the businesses are being handled by 5 private haulers, and we have a big share of the multifamily zone. So if you look at these numbers, we only have 275 accounts on businesses, and we don't have 322 accounts on multifamily. So in a perfect world, if it's possible or not, I would give one up to pick up the other one. If we want to keep that 5 multifamily 5+ units accounts, I would pick up those 322 and give up the 275. So there will be enough business for all the haulers. If it's 3 zones, 4 zones, or 5 zones, whatever the council would decide. I don't know if it's possible or not. I'm just raising that issue right now. So I think 4 haulers, 4 zones would be a good number for me, but if we can put it in our RFP, we want 3 zones today, but we may change our mind to go up to 4 to 5 and let them bid their RFP proposals or bring the proposals based on maybe 3, 4, and 5. I don't know how difficult or easy that is, but if I have to pick a number today, I would go with 4 zones and non-exclusive at this time to create to still have that competition between the haulers as far as different times of pickup and everything. I don't know if we can dictate that, because right now with the residential one, we are doing all the residential pickup. Days are all set. Thursdays are in one area, Tuesdays are in another area. I don't know if we can do that or not, but I think that's something we need to look into. But for me, if I have to pick a number, it would be 4 zones and non-exclusive. But I'm open for the RFP to come back and tell us, no, Vartan, you're wrong. 3 zones and exclusive is a better idea. So we're open to it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mr. Mayor, for a point of clarification, so 4 zones, non-exclusive, 4, then it would typically non-exclusive or citywide to provide the competition. So if we divide up the city, then you may want to consider exclusive for each zone. But 4 private haulers will provide service for the entire city.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, my understanding is we're not making a decision on that today.
Correct.
This is just giving directions or ideas for the RFP. So that's what I was thinking about, having 4 zones because we have enough accounts. Right now there are 5 companies that are...
Actually 4, because one consolidated with the 5th.
Okay, so 4 companies, they have 80% of the business, and it's sufficient enough to be in the city. So for the business side. So that's what I was referring to, maybe have 4 zones. I think 3 zones is a little bit too small, but again, the RFP will come back and tell us which one is a better number. But as far as us giving up the multi-family one, I don't know if I'm ready to make that decision.
Well, a couple things. In the scenario that's described, you would not make that determination until a later date, later next spring, because of the mechanics of the RFP process. Here's bid package number 1. This is our proposal for all of the commercial business in either this in a zone or if it's a citywide franchise. And then you open up bid package number 2, and that is what the rates could be for multifamily residential, large multifamily. Now, to your point, if the council says, because we're effectively a bedroom community at the end of the day, we have, as you can see, relatively few business customers citywide compared to other cities. The idea of increasing the number of zones or franchisees probably suggests that it should be a citywide franchise. No zones, just one big zone being City of Glendale, and those 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever the council wanted would operate anywhere in the city in our commercial, retail, industrial businesses. If we were to do that, then I would suggest to you that we ought not put too much stock in the idea of divesting of large multifamily customers, because as you've indicated, as I think about driving down East Palmer Avenue, there needs to be one truck on there, and right now we have 88% of that business. And so to your point, do we pick up the rest of the large multifamily, those other 322 accounts, and in doing so divest of the 275? That would be the more likely scenario given the facts, the context that you've outlined. And I just want to make sure that we're hearing you clear, because if that ultimately animates what the RFP is, it'll cut out a great deal of angst from your employees, I would imagine, and it clarify the issue for the haulers.
I want to hear from my colleagues and see what do they think about that.
So about this issue of exclusive versus non-exclusive, I think so. I'm a little confused about the mayor's proposal also, because are you talking about 4 franchises as opposed to 4 zones? I think that's what you're saying, right? You're saying 4 franchises because if you divide it to zones, then and their zones are they're non-exclusive.
4
franchises.
Yes.
So about the issue of non-exclusive,
if you want to have exclusive, you have to have zones for it.
Zones, exactly. Right. So if we're going, and I know this is not upon us, right? We're not deciding on it, but just to put it out there, if it's a non-exclusive franchise, what's to stop the larger hauler, a company that's national or regional, to practice what's known as, in other areas of the economy as dumping? Set a very low price and have everyone come to them and squeeze everyone else out of the market. What's to stop them from doing that?
That's a great question, because you've seen that firsthand.
That could happen. If they have the market muscle, then they'll do it.
So one of the things that stops that most directly is the city reserving the right to maintain 4 franchisees. So you may undercut all of the folks that are also franchised, but as soon as you either drive out of business or acquire, usually what ends up happening, Mr. Garpetian's company, well, then the city goes and does a request for qualifications to bring in another one. So now the idea of...
I know, but that process can perpetuate itself forever.
Truly, and if that's the case, and that hauler continues to do that, then the beneficiary is the city, because they continue to undercut themselves. They would just continue offering the lowest possible rates forever, presumably not making any money, and saying, well, at some point they have to stop that practice.
I understand.
And so it's if the city, having seen that, again, where we're going to have 3 permittees, 3 franchisees, but not reserving the right to always have 3, well, then one gobbles up the other 2. And so we want to make sure that we have, if we're going to go that route, that we have that opportunity to preserve that idea of competition.
Thank you. And the other thought about that also is that, one of the stated goals of franchising or zoning is to reduce the amount of traffic of these heavy dump trucks on our streets. We have zones, there's one truck that's going to come on this one place once every so often and take care of it. When you have different companies, then you have them traveling constantly because different entities will be going with different companies, assuming that's what happens, and that's obviously counterproductive. Again, I'm just putting these thoughts out there. My take on the number of franchises, again, I think 4 is sort of probably the ultimate, the optimal number. But I like the way, Mr. Ochoa, you phrased it. You do 3 or 4. That way, you allow the companies to make the appropriate proposal. One question that I have: if it's franchises as opposed to zones, will those that bid for these be able to? Would it require a different bid for a zone as opposed to a franchise? What I'm saying is that no. Will it be?
It would be an exclusive franchise in an exclusive zone or a citywide franchise, but effectively it would be very similar in terms of
so their bids would be the same for.
You would hope and expect. I'm sorry, I spoke too soon. My apologies. In an exclusive zone, you would expect a greater efficiency.
Right.
So the structure would be similar, but the pricing theoretically would be more efficient on an exclusive basis than in a non-exclusive basis.
Right, because that citywide depends on how much they have to travel and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's also one thing for us to consider, because we don't want them to submit their bids and then say, well, for if it's not a zone, it's really different. The pricing is going to be different. My goal is to have as much certainty in this process as possible. Because certainty for us will mean certainty for our residents and our business, for our businesses. And in terms of the issue of what was the last issue? The commercial versus the multifamily.
Yes, sir.
Non-commercial. If we can, you're saying we can consider that point when the time comes for it.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't have to be done now. Okay, I'm comfortable with that.
But that's the second leg of the RFP.
Correct, sir. So think of it in 2 envelopes. One is the first bid package. The second bid package would be multifamily, which you conceivably never have to open.
Mr. Najarian, do you have anything else to add?
I don't have any additional questions.
Okay.
But my comment would be, I think the 4-zone exclusive area is where I'm leaning.
Okay.
So am I. I mean, it was probably obvious from my comments. But
one point of clarification, because we've had this now a couple of times. When you say 4 zones as opposed to 4 franchisees?
Exclusive zones.
4 exclusive zones.
Yes.
I would only submit to you, and certainly we can do that, but again, just so I know that I've said it, the business sector is relatively small in the city, and so subdividing the number of businesses will dilute the value of those franchises. So, but certainly it's your policy.
The price is going to go higher for the consumer.
Arguably, yes.
Because we'll be smaller.
What is your suggestion? What is your suggestion?
Our recommendation has been 3 exclusive zones. Has been the 3. And now you could say 3 or 4, Mr. City Manager. It really doesn't make that much difference. And I would submit to you it's probably on the margins. And so to the extent that the council wants to make a policy of 4, as Mr. Golani indicates, we will equalize the value of those wherever we draw those lines.
So 3 zones, 3 exclusive franchises, each for each zone.
Yes, sir, that's what we have recommended, but we have outlined for you different scenarios. Please feel free to make your policy.
So are you suggesting that if it doesn't make sense to go with 4 if it's only the commercial, but if it's also with the multifamily, then 4 may be a good number?
It could be, but you won't know that until later on once you've made that decision. And that's just a function of this 2-step process and the strictures of law that we have to comply with.
Okay. Can we, as you mentioned or suggested, go with 3 as it's recommended here, with an option with 4 in the RFP?
We can, sir.
I think then we can at the end look at the both options and 3 zones or 4 zones and say, okay, 3 zones makes more sense for the haulers and they're giving us a better deal than 4 zones that would dilute the value of that franchise.
Yes, sir.
I think that's.
I have a question about the administration of these franchises. Now, if we have 4 instead of 3, is that going to tick it up to maybe we're going to need an administrator for 4, or we won't have to do any more hiring?
I don't think that we would have to do that, honestly, ma'am. I think considering right now we're 25 highly active or 15 highly active haulers and 22 not very active, I think we would be able to absorb that.
I just want to still raise my concern that if it's 3 zones and I'm a business owner and I worked with company A, let's say, and I had very bad experience, and I switched it to company B, and now you're telling me I have to go back to that company A, that I don't know how it's going to work, because this is private haulers. All the time they create some sort of problem, so I just want to raise my concern.
The other alternative, because that point is well taken, the other alternative that was outlined in Mr. Golanian's presentation is to have exclusive zones with the idea that the City of Glendale Integrated Waste Management, Inc. is still operational, and if you really did not like your hauler X was just a bad service provider, you could contract with the City of Glendale, Inc. to haul that waste. But there again, you're introducing another variable into that rate dynamic and thus diluting the value potentially of the zone. And so council would have that discussion. Do you want the city to be able to participate, effectively compete, if you will, at least on a passive scale, against those haulers, or do you just not want the city engaged at all? And that gets to, I think, Mr. Agajanian's point of, I just don't like the hauler based on my geographic zone. Give me an alternative, even if it's the city. I'll go with the city. There's something to be said for that, but it will dilute the value and efficiency of the rates.
Okay. If I may add, Council Member Agajanian, currently we don't have any agreements with any of these 37 haulers. Once we go through the selection process, and whether we have 3 or 4 franchisees, we enter into franchise agreements. And to mitigate concerns like that, we as the city will be able to intermediate and resolve concerns like that, issues, problems, because now we have more control, and we put in clauses that in case of, I can't say one customer complaint, but in case of repetitive customer complaints, we'll have clauses that we can terminate the agreement.
Or at least assess liquidated damages.
Yeah.
It could act in reverse. It could be a motivational factor for them to really work harder,
hopefully.
provide better service.
Okay,
I would go for the 3.
So in the school district, if you live outside a particular district and you petition the school for good cause, they'll let you take your kid to the other school. Is that something we want to get into? If a customer like Mr. Agajanian says these guys are dropping garbage and they're waking me up and they're just not what I expected, here's my petition, let me go to the guy that's hauling in zone 2. We have an administrator that would review that on good cause, would perhaps give an exemption to the exclusivity for one or business only, or is that just more bureaucracy that we don't want to get into?
It could very well be the latter. I would think that if you wanted to do that, I would rather entrust our own integrated waste management function to provide that type of service, because we're dealing with a series of just one-offs. I would think that
default to the city's service.
If you wanted to go there, and then again, do you want to go there?
And I guess maybe, I don't want to get into the woods now, but what will constitute a breach of the agreement? Because an instance like Councilman Agajanian's example, I mean, that's a breach of the agreement with the city, and probably with the individual that's involved. So what happens when they breach? I mean, at what point do we deprive them of a franchise?
We basically look at the number of complaints on a monthly or quarterly basis. Are they resolved? Are they unresolved missed pickups? evidence of overbilling, of overpricing, of undersizing an account, because some folks will say, oh, no, I don't need a 3-yard bin 3 times a week. I just need it 1 time a week. And now it's littering the rest of the folks in the shopping center and impacting them. All those types of items would be listed in the franchise agreement on the front end. And if you start checking those boxes, and if it's not cured within the specified amount of time, you're in breach, and you don't cure within 30, 45 days, whatever it is, then we move you out and move somebody else in.
And who'll have oversight authority over this?
Mr. Galania, Mr. Marcarello.
Public Works.
Yes.
At the end of the day. Okay.
Okay.
That's it, Mr.
Do you have enough directions to?
We need a motion with the direction.
Okay. So, Mr. Najarian, would you like to make a motion?
Well, let's see what we got here.
So it's essentially authorizing an RFP, issuance of an RFP or the RFP to be prepared, and then the direction on the items that you suggest. I think we just need
and
to
our
beat that
number
rapid.
was, so I'm going to move to direct staff to issue a request for proposals for commercial solid waste collection services under a franchise zone system consisting of
3, possibly 4.
3
I mean, let's make it 3, otherwise it would be very hard for them to.
zones with, including in the RFP, the possibility that council may expand it to 4.
That's your motion?
Does that cover base? Let's not
Yes,
get
I'll
too
second it
detailed.
if that's a sufficient motion for staff.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Agajanian?
Yes.
Devine?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Sinanian?
Yes.
Mayor Garapetian?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. What's next, please?
Next would be adjournment.
Move to
Second.
We are adjourned.